The offer came through on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after I'd applied. $52,000 a year to walk the halls of Riverside General Hospital and check that doors stayed locked. I'd been applying for security positions since March. Gas stations, apartment complexes, mall patrol, anything that would keep my landlord from posting eviction notices. Most places offered minimum wage, maybe $1 above if they were feeling generous. This rural Oregon hospital wanted to pay me nearly double what I'd made managing inventory at the warehouse before they'd laid off half the staff. Should have been my first warning. I sat in my studio apartment staring at the email on my laptop, calculator open beside me. The numbers worked. They more than worked. They solved problems. Rent, overdue electric bill, the credit card I'd been dodging calls about. The hospital administrator, some woman named Patricia Volkov, had written 3 paragraphs about how difficult the position had been to fill. Qualified candidates declining after interviews, previous hires leaving within weeks. She'd made it sound like the night shift was just too isolated, too boring for people used to city excitement. Rural Oregon, graveyard hours, basic patrol duties. I called her back within the hour and accepted. Orientation started on a Sunday evening. The hospital squatted on the edge of town, 4 stories of pale brick and narrow windows that caught the last orange light of sunset. Woods pressed close on 3 sides, dense fir and cedar that made the parking lot feel like a clearing carved from wilderness. The main entrance had that institutional smell, antiseptic and floor wax, and something underneath that might have been boiled vegetables from the cafeteria. Patricia met me in the lobby, a thin woman in her 50s with silver hair cut short and practical. She walked fast, heels clicking on linoleum, handing me paperwork as we moved through corridors painted that particular shade of green that exists only in hospitals and government buildings. "You'll shadow Alexander tonight," she said. "He's been our night watchman for 31 years. Retirement's overdue, honestly, but he insisted on training his replacement personally." We took the stairs down to the basement. The security office sat at the end of a hallway lined with storage rooms and maintenance closets, a cramped space dominated by a desk, filing cabinets, and a wall of monitors showing grainy surveillance feeds. Alexander Howard stood when we entered, a stocky man with thinning gray hair combed over his scalp and bifocals that magnified watery blue eyes. His handshake felt papery, weak. "This is Nathan Rice," Patricia said. "Nathan, Alexander will walk you through the nightly protocols. I'll leave you to it." She disappeared before I could respond, heels fading back down the hallway. Alexander watched me for a long moment, something I couldn't read moving behind those thick lenses. Then he turned to the desk and picked up a worn leather journal, the kind with a strap that wrapped around to keep it closed. The cover had darkened with handling, corners soft from years of being shoved into pockets. "You'll need this." His voice came out gravelly, roughened by age or cigarettes or both. "Read it. Every word. Don't skip nothing." I took the journal, heavier than I'd expected. "What is it?" "Protocols." He sat down heavily in the desk chair, gestured for me to take the folding chair against the wall. "Rules for the night shift, things you need to know." I opened the journal. The first page had been written in careful block letters, black ink faded to brown. "Night protocols, Riverside General." Below that, a list. I skimmed the first few entries. Never enter the pediatric ward between midnight and 3 a.m. under any circumstances. Avoid the 7th floor elevator if the doors open without being summoned. Maintain fresh flashlight batteries at all times. Check before each shift. If emergency broadcasts activate without corresponding alerts from staff, retreat immediately to security office and lock the door. I looked up. Alexander was watching me with that same unreadable expression. "This is..." I started, then stopped, tried again. "What exactly am I supposed to do with this?" "Follow it." He said it flat, matter of fact. "Every rule's there for a reason." "The pediatric ward thing, is that a privacy issue? Some kind of regulation?" It's a survival issue. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You stay out of that ward during those hours. You hear crying, you hear anything at all from up there, you stay out. Understood? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. One of the monitors flickered, showing an empty hallway that could have been anywhere in the building. I'd dealt with paranoid coworkers before. The warehouse had employed a guy convinced that management was monitoring bathroom breaks through the ventilation system. Old Alexander here had probably worked nights for so long that he'd invented problems to make the job feel important. Sure, I said. Understood. His jaw tightened. You're not taking this serious. I'm taking the job serious. I'll do my rounds, check the locks, monitor the cameras. That's what you're paying me for, right? Paying you more than it's worth, boy. He stood, joints creaking. They told you that? How many people turned this down? Actually, yeah. Patricia had mentioned it. I'd figured the isolation scared people off, or maybe the overnight hours. Alexander pulled a flashlight from his belt, heavy-duty mag light that probably doubled as a club. He twisted the end, and bright LED light flooded the office. Fresh batteries, he said. Every single shift. You check them before you start your rounds. This dies on you at the wrong time. He shook his head. Just keep it working. I nodded, tried to look attentive. He walked me through the rest. How to log entries in the security system, which doors needed manual checks because their sensors glitched, where to find the spare keys for maintenance areas. Normal stuff. Practical information I could actually use. But he kept circling back to that journal, tapping it with one thick finger. Read all of it tonight, before your first solo shift. Some things you need to know before you're walking these halls alone. The night shift staff filtered in around 10:30. I met them in the second-floor nurses' station, Alexander making introductions with obvious reluctance. Catherine Matthews ran the night shift nursing team, a woman in her mid-40s with black hair pulled back tight, and dark eyes that assessed me in one quick sweep. She wore navy scrubs and had the kind of confident posture that came from years of handling emergencies. "Welcome to Riverside," she said. Slight accent, Spanish maybe, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Alexander training you properly?" He gave me the protocols. I held up the journal. Something passed between them. Quick look, gone before I could interpret it. Good. She turned to organize medication charts on the desk. Follow those, and you'll do fine. Bentley Cooper appeared from one of the patient rooms, an athletic guy in burgundy scrubs with wire-rimmed glasses and hair gelled into careful spikes. He grinned when Alexander introduced us, friendly and easy. "Night watch, huh? Pretty quiet gig most of the time." He had a West Coast accent, California, or maybe Oregon coast. "You'll probably spend most shifts watching Netflix in the security office." "That allowed?" I asked. "Who's gonna complain?" He laughed, nervous edge to it now that I was listening. "Just keep your volume down." I decided to test the water. Alexander was telling me about some of the protocols, the pediatric ward thing, avoiding certain elevators. Catherine's hands stilled on the charts. Bentley's smile froze. "Yeah? Well?" Bentley adjusted his glasses. "Alexander's pretty particular about procedures. 30 years here, you know? Gets set in his ways. So those rules aren't actually their hospital policy," Catherine cut in. Clipped tone, no room for discussion. "You'll follow them." "I'm just trying to understand the reasoning." "The reasoning is its policy." She met my eyes, firm, final. "You have questions about your duties, you ask Alexander. We focus on patient care, you focus on security. Clear? Real clear." Clear as the way Bentley suddenly needed to check something down the hall, throwing an apologetic shrug over his shoulder as he left. Clear as how Catherine turned back to her charts, conversation obviously finished. I stood there another moment, journal heavy in my hand, watching them move through their routines with practiced efficiency. Whatever they knew about this place, about those protocols, they weren't sharing. Alexander appeared at my elbow, materializing from wherever he'd wandered off to. "Told you," he said quietly. "They won't talk about it, nobody does." The first 2 weeks passed quiet enough. I walked my rounds, checked doors, logged entries in the security office, tested my flashlight batteries twice a shift, kept the journal Alexander gave me in my back pocket. Read through it 3 more times during slow hours, trying to make sense of the rules that still didn't add up to anything rational. Nobody mentioned the protocols. Catherine nodded when I passed the nurse's station. Bentley waved from supply closets. The night janitor, whose name I learned was Marcus, grunted hello around midnight when our paths crossed near the cafeteria. Normal people doing normal work in a normal hospital. I started believing Alexander was just paranoid. 31 years of night shifts would mess with anyone's head. Then the third Thursday happened. 1:15 in the morning, I was finishing my second-floor sweep when I heard it. Singing. High and thin. Drifting down the east corridor from where it dead-ended at the pediatric ward doors. My hand went to the journal in my pocket. Never enter the pediatric ward between midnight and 3 a.m. I stopped walking. The singing continued, a child's voice doing some nursery rhyme I half recognized. The melody wound through the hallway, clear as anything. Could be a patient. Could be a kid who couldn't sleep, wandering out of their room. Could be a dozen reasonable explanations. I checked my watch again. 1:16, middle of the restricted window. The singing stopped. I should have walked away, should have gone downstairs, logged the sound, maybe called up to the pediatric nurse to check on the kids. Should have followed the protocol that Alexander insisted was a survival issue. Instead, I walked toward the double doors. My footsteps echoed too loud on the linoleum. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that constant electric buzz I'd gotten used to ignoring. I reached the doors and pressed my face to the narrow window, looking through the safety glass into the pediatric ward corridor beyond. Empty. Dark except for the green emergency exit signs at either end and the glow from the nurse's station desk lamp. Nothing moved. No child in the hallway. No nurse making rounds. I pulled the handle. Locked, which was standard for the ward at night. I had the master key on my belt, the whole ring of them Alexander had handed over during that first shift. My fingers found the right one without thinking. Don't do it. I unlocked the door. The hallway stretched ahead, identical to every other corridor in this place. Scuffed tile, cream-colored walls with cheerful animal murals that looked dingy in the low light, doors on both sides, most of them closed. The nurse's station sat empty 15 feet ahead on the left. I stepped inside and let the door swing shut behind me. Laughter burst out from somewhere down the hall. Not one child, several. High giggling that bounced off the walls and made it impossible to tell which direction it came from. My hand went to the flashlight on my belt. I pulled it free, clicked it on, swept the beam down the corridor. Nothing. No movement. The laughter cut off like someone flipped a switch. I checked the nurse's station first. Empty coffee mug on the desk. Clipboard with patient charts. Computer screen showing a screensaver of tropical fish. The pediatric nurse must have been making rounds or taking a break. I looked at the patient board behind the desk. White board with room numbers and names written in dry erase marker. 301, Emma Sanchez, age 7. 303, Marcus Webb, age 4. 305, empty. 307, empty. 309, Lily Patterson, age 9. 5 rooms on this side, only 3 occupied. The laughter started again, and this time I could place it. Left side of the hall, past the nurse's station. Coming from 305 or 307, the empty rooms. I moved down the corridor, flashlight beam cutting through the dimness. Reached 305 and stopped outside the door. The laughter was definitely coming from inside. Multiple voices, kids playing, that breathless, excited sound of a game in full swing. The patient board said empty. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. Standard pediatric room. 2 beds, both stripped down to bare mattresses. Rolling cart with medical equipment. Chair for parents. Window with blinds drawn. Nightlight plugged into the wall socket, casting a yellow glow across the floor. No children. No toys. Nothing that could have made the sound. The laughter stopped the second I opened the door. I stood there, flashlight beam moving across the empty space. My heart was hammering now, that sick, fast rhythm that makes your hands shake. Something rolled across the floor in 307. A wheel sound, plastic on linoleum, small and quick. I stepped back into the hallway and moved to the next door, pressed my ear against it first. Silence, complete and total. Turned the handle. Another empty room, identical to the first. Bare mattresses, medical cart, parent chair. A red ball sat in the middle of the floor. One of those playground balls, maybe 8 inches across, bright primary red. It hadn't been rolling when I opened the door, just sitting there. Still. I walked to it, bent down, touched it with one finger. Cold. The rubber was cold enough to make me pull my hand back. Behind me, down the hall, a door clicked shut, soft but distinct. I spun around, flashlight up. Empty corridor, all the doors closed. My throat had gone dry. I backed out of 307, leaving the ball where it sat and headed for the exit. Walked fast, but didn't run. Wouldn't let myself run. The double doors were 20 feet away. 15. 10. A child's voice spoke from right behind my shoulder. "Are you here to play?" I didn't turn around. Shoved through the doors and let them swing shut behind me. Kept walking until I reached the stairwell, and took the stairs down 2 at a time to the basement. The security office felt too bright and too small when I dropped into the desk chair. My hands were still shaking. I put the flashlight down and stared at the monitors, watching the feeds cycle through empty hallways and quiet rooms. Rational explanations. Had to be rational explanations. I pulled up the patient registry on the computer and checked the pediatric ward. 3 patients, just like the board showed. Emma Sanchez, Marcus Webb, Lily Patterson, all in their assigned rooms. All asleep according to the last nurse check at 12:45. No reason for laughter in empty rooms. No reason for a ball to appear where nothing had been. I opened the desk drawers, looking for something to write in besides Alexander's journal. The top drawer held pens and a stapler. Second drawer had old incident reports, nothing recent. Third drawer on the left side didn't open when I pulled the handle. Locked. I tried the master key ring. None of them fit. Took me 10 minutes of searching to find the small key taped to the underside of the desk's keyboard tray. Alexander's handwriting on the tape, for emergencies only. The drawer opened with a scrape of metal on metal. Inside sat a stack of composition notebooks, the cheap kind with black and white marbled covers. I pulled out the top one and opened it. Alexander's handwriting filled the pages, dates going back 20 years, entries describing things that shouldn't exist. February 3rd, 3rd floor supply closet, heard patient calling for nurse. Opened door to find elderly woman in hospital gown sitting on floor. Asked her name. She said Margaret Winters. Checked registry. Margaret Winters died 4 days ago in room 212, June 17th. Pediatric ward 1:30 a.m. Children playing in 307. Counted 5 distinct voices. Room has been empty for 2 weeks. October 9th. Elevator opened on 7th floor without being called. Woman in outdated nurse uniform stood inside. Asked if I was going down. I did not enter. Doors closed after 30 seconds. I flipped through the notebooks, 5 of them, each one filled with similar entries. Patients who died but never left. Voices calling from empty spaces. Shadows moving wrong in the stairwells. The bottom notebook was different. Older, water-stained. The handwriting wasn't Alexander's. First page, Dated 1984. Maintenance log. Building anomalies and historical research. I read through it. Whoever wrote it had done their homework. Floor plans from the original construction in 1965. Property records going back to 1892. Newspaper clippings from the town library. The hospital sat on 11 acres at the edge of town. Before 1965, the land held a different building. Willowbrook Orphanage, established 1903. Fire on January 22nd, 1962. Started in the kitchen around 2 a.m., spread through the wooden structure in less than an hour. 37 children died, ages 3 to 14. Most of them trapped in the second-floor dormitories when the stairs collapsed. The orphanage burned to the foundation. They cleared the site and built the hospital 3 years later. I closed the notebook and sat there, staring at nothing. I spent the next 3 nights reading through those composition notebooks, sitting in the basement security office while the hospital settled into its quiet hours above me. Alexander's entries painted a clear picture once I stopped trying to rationalize them away. The protocols weren't superstition or paranoia. They were boundaries, barriers between the living staff and whatever remained from the orphanage fire, presences that grew stronger after midnight when the building emptied out and darkness pressed against the windows. The rules made sense now. Don't enter the pediatric ward between midnight and 3 a.m. because that's when the orphanage children were most active, reliving their routines in the spaces where dormitories once stood. Avoid the 7th-floor elevator if it opened without being summoned because nothing living called for it. Keep fresh batteries in your flashlight because darkness gave them strength. Retreat to the security office if emergency broadcasts activated without staff alerts because the building itself sometimes remembered disasters that happened 60 years ago. I followed the protocols after that, checked my routes, avoided the restricted areas, kept my head down and my mouth shut. Worked fine for almost 2 weeks. Then Lexi Griffin came to find me on a Tuesday night around 11:30. I was doing a sweep of the first floor when she appeared at the end of the corridor near the administrative wing, still wearing her light blue scrubs with that silver cross necklace catching the overhead fluorescence. Her face looked pale even from 20 feet away. "Nathan?" Her voice came out quiet, that nervous tremor more pronounced than usual. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I walked over, flashlight hanging from my belt. "What's wrong?" She glanced down the empty hallway behind her, then back to me. "I heard something earlier, during my med rounds on the 4th floor." Her hands twisted together at her waist. "There's a child crying on the 7th floor. A little girl, I think. She keeps calling for help." My stomach dropped. "The 7th floor?" "I know it's closed off." Lexi's words came faster now, anxious. But I heard her clearly through the stairwell door. "She's scared, Nathan. She keeps saying, 'Please help me, I can't get out.'" I checked my watch. 11:34. The 7th floor had been sealed for structural damage 3 years ago, according to hospital records, though Alexander's notebooks told a different story. A nurse named Caroline Hendricks had died up there in the fire that wasn't officially a fire, trapped in a supply closet while emergency crews searched the wrong wing. The protocols explicitly forbade elevator access to the 7th floor between sunset and sunrise. "When did you hear this?" I kept my voice measured, calm. "Around 10:45. Lexi's brown eyes searched my face. I reported it to Catherine, but she said the floor's been empty for years, and I must have heard pipes or the ventilation system, but Nathan, it wasn't pipes, it was a child. And you're sure it came from the 7th floor? The stairwell only goes up to 6 from that access point, but the sound was coming from above. She took a half step closer. "I know what I heard. Someone needs help up there." I stood there in that hallway with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and felt the weight of an impossible choice settling onto my shoulders. The protocols existed for good reasons. Alexander had survived 31 years by following them religiously, and his notebooks documented what happened to people who didn't. But Lexi was standing in front of me describing a child in distress, and every instinct I had said, You don't ignore something that, even if it wasn't really a child anymore. Did anyone else hear it? I asked. I don't think so. Bentley was down in the cafeteria, and Catherine was with a patient in 412. Lexi's hands wouldn't stop moving, fingers pulling at the hem of her scrub top. But I know what I heard, Nathan. She sounded terrified. I thought about the orphanage fire. 37 children trapped in second-floor dormitories when the stairs collapsed, smoke filling the building while they screamed for help that came too late. The hospital sat directly on top of those ashes now, 4 stories of modern medicine built over 60-year-old tragedy. And the 7th floor, according to Alexander's research, aligned almost exactly with where the orphanage attic had been. Storage space that became a death trap when flames climbed the walls and stairs fell away. Please. Lexi's voice pulled me back. I can't stop thinking about her up there alone. I met her eyes and saw genuine concern, the kind of compassion that made someone a good nurse. She didn't know about the protocols, didn't understand what the crying actually meant. I'll check it out, I heard myself say. Relief washed across her face. Thank you, I can show you where— No. The word came out harder than I intended. I softened it. You need to finish your rounds. I'll handle this. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but please be careful up there. The structural damage— I know. I was already moving toward the east stairwell. Get back to your floor. I took the stairs to the 6th floor, then stood in front of the door marked Authorized Personnel Only that led to the 7th. My flashlight felt heavy on my belt. My watch read 11:48. The crying started while I was standing there, high and thin, filtering through the door. A child's voice, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing those hiccuping breaths that come from sustained fear. The words were muffled but distinct enough. Please help me. I can't get out. Please. Every protocol Alexander had drilled into me said, walk away. Go back to the security office, log the report, let it cycle through whatever loop it was stuck in. I pulled out my master keyring instead. The door opened onto darkness and the smell of dust. I clicked on my flashlight and climbed the last flight of stairs to a corridor that looked like it belonged in a different building entirely. Faded linoleum instead of modern tile, older light fixtures with half the bulbs missing, walls that needed paint. The air felt colder up here, stale. The crying came from somewhere down the hall to my left. I walked toward it, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, most of them closed. Old patient rooms from before the renovations, supply closets, a nurse's station with an empty desk and dead computer monitors. Hello? I kept my voice even. Where are you? The crying stopped, then started again, closer now. Behind a door marked Storage, Keep Locked. I tried the handle, wouldn't budge. My master key slid into the lock and turned with a click that sounded too loud in the silence. The door swung open. A little girl stood in the center of the small room, maybe 6 years old, wearing a white nightgown that looked like it came from another era. Dark hair hung in tangled curls around her face. She was crying, shoulders shaking with sobs, both hands pressed against a wall that showed scorch marks in the beam of my flashlight. Please help me, she said without turning around. I can't get out. The door won't open. I took one step into the room. Hey, it's okay. The door's open now. She didn't acknowledge me, just kept crying, kept pushing at the burned wall. Please help me, I can't get out. My throat went tight. I moved closer, reached out toward her shoulder. She reset. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment she was pressing against the wall, the next she was standing in the exact same position I'd first seen her, starting the sob sequence over from the beginning. Same words, same movements, same desperate pushing against a door that hadn't existed for 60 years. I was watching the night of January 22nd, 1962. The night Caroline Hendricks died in a supply closet on the 7th floor. Except, this wasn't Caroline. This was one of the orphanage children, trapped in an attic storage room when the fire climbed the walls and the only door swelled shut from the heat. "I see you," I said quietly. "I'm sorry nobody came." She reset again, started crying from the beginning. I backed out of the room and closed the door. The hospital went wrong the moment that lock clicked shut. Emergency lights down the corridor began flashing in sequence, one after another, marching away from me toward the far end of the hall. No alarm sounded, just the lights pulsing red in perfect rhythm, each one triggering the next. I turned and headed for the stairs. Behind me, doors started opening. Not all at once, one by one, in the same sequence as the lights. I didn't look back, just kept walking, flashlight beam steady on the floor ahead. A patient call button activated somewhere below me. Then another. Then a dozen more. The electronic chimes echoing up through the stairwell in overlapping cascades. I reached the 6th floor and pulled open the stairwell door. The corridor lights were doing the same sequential flash, running the length of the building in both directions. Vacant rooms lit up red, then dark, then red again. Bentley stood at the nurse's station with a phone pressed to his ear, staring at the call board where every single light was blinking. He saw me and his face went pale. "What did you do?" He didn't yell it, barely whispered. I didn't answer. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged. We both looked. The doors opened on an empty car, stayed open for 5 seconds, then closed. The floor indicator showed it descending. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, basement. Then back up. Basement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It stopped at 7. Stayed there for exactly 10 seconds. Then started the cycle again. Catherine emerged from a patient room, took one look at the flashing lights and call buttons and the elevator indicator climbing towards 7 again, and turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Get Alexander's journal," she said. "Right now." The emergency lights kept flashing in sequence, running patterns down every corridor on every floor, and somewhere above us the elevator dinged as it reached the 7th floor for the 3rd time. I retrieved the journal from my back pocket. Didn't need to run to the security office for it. I'd been carrying the damn thing every shift since I found Alexander's notebooks. The elevator doors opened on the 6th floor again. Empty cab, fluorescent lights humming inside. The doors stayed open for exactly 10 seconds while emergency lights continued their rhythmic flashing down every corridor. Then the elevator descended, and I knew it was heading to the basement before cycling back to the 7th floor. "What did you do?" Catherine's voice cut through the electronic chimes of the call buttons. "I went to the 7th floor. No point lying about it now. A child was crying in the storage room. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation of something she'd already suspected. How many times did the elevator complete the cycle? I counted backward in my head. 4 times. This'll be the 5th. Bentley set the phone down carefully on the nurse's station counter. "Catherine, the patients are waking up. Mrs. Chen in 604 is asking why her call button activated by itself." The elevator dinged in the distance. Basement level. Catherine turned to Bentley. "Handle the patients. Tell them it's an electrical malfunction." She looked back at me. "You're going to fix this." "I don't know how." "Then figure it out, because whatever you started up there isn't stopping on its own." The elevator mechanism engaged again, pulling the cab upward. I watched the floor indicator above the doors. 3, 4, 5, 6. It passed without stopping. The machinery groaned as it climbed to 7. 10 seconds of silence. Then it started descending again. I opened Alexander's journal, flipping through pages I'd already memorized. The rules were barriers he'd written, not explanations, not solutions, just ways to avoid triggering what already existed in the building's bones. but I'd triggered it anyway. The emergency lights continued their pattern. Flash, flash, flash down the east corridor, then the west corridor, then south, methodical, deliberate. Someone was using the building's electrical system to communicate. "She's trying to tell me something," I said. Catherine's jaw tightened. "She?" "The girl in the storage room, the one I found on the 7th floor. You opened the door. She was crying. She said she couldn't get out. She's been saying that for 62 years. Catherine's voice stayed level, but her hands gripped the edge of the nurse's station counter. "Alexander warned every night watchman who came before you. The 7th floor stays locked because what's up there can't be reasoned with. Can't be helped. It just loops. Until someone breaks the pattern. Until someone makes it worse." The elevator reached the basement again, started climbing. I closed the journal and headed for the stairwell. "Where are you going?" Catherine called after me. "To finish what I started." The 7th floor corridor looked different than it had 20 minutes earlier. The faded linoleum had developed dark streaks running toward the storage room, and the temperature had dropped enough that my breath came out in thin clouds. Emergency lights flashed in their systematic rhythm, illuminating patches of wall that shouldn't have looked damaged but did, scorch marks spreading like bruises across the painted surface. The storage room door stood open. I'd closed it when I left, pulled it shut behind me, and heard the latch click. Now it gaped, showing darkness inside that my flashlight couldn't quite penetrate. "I know you're here," I said. My voice sounded too loud in the empty corridor. The little girl stepped out of the storage room. Not the reset version I'd seen before. This one looked directly at me with eyes that held too much awareness for a 6-year-old. Her white nightgown had burn marks along the hem. "You saw me." Her voice echoed slightly, like she was speaking from somewhere farther away than 3 feet in front of me. "Nobody sees us anymore. They just follow the rules and pretend we don't exist. I saw you. You opened the door. You were trapped." She tilted her head, studying me with an expression that made my chest tighten. "We're all trapped. Have been since the fire. Since before the fire, some of us. Some of you? The children from the orphanage, the patients who died scared, the nurse who burned in the supply closet." She gestured down the corridor, and I saw them, shapes forming in the spaces between emergency light flashes. A teenage boy in pajamas from the 1960s, an elderly woman in a hospital gown, a man with bandages wrapped around his head. More behind them, dozens more, crowding the hallway with their translucent forms. My hand tightened on the flashlight. The weight felt inadequate against what I was seeing. "The rules kept you contained," I said. Alexander's notebooks had been clear about that. The protocols weren't protection. They were barriers, ways to avoid drawing attention from what couldn't leave. "The rules kept us separate," the girl corrected. "From the living. From each other. From remembering." She looked back at the storage room. "I've been pushing on that wall for 62 years. I forgot why. Forgot everything except being trapped and scared and alone." The orphanage burned, January 22nd, 1962. "Did it?" Her question wasn't skeptical. It was genuine confusion. "I don't remember a fire, just smoke and heat in the door that wouldn't open." Behind her, the other spirit shifted. The elderly woman reached toward a wall, fingers passing through it. The teenage boy stared at his own hands with an expression of deep bewilderment. "They don't remember either," I said quietly. "We remember the fear, the pain, the moment we couldn't escape." The girl's voice stayed steady, but something in her translucent face cracked. "We don't remember what came after. Don't remember that there was an after." The elevator dinged at the end of the corridor. Doors opened on an empty cab. The lights inside flickered in the same rhythm as the emergency lights. "You broke the barriers," the girl said. "Now we can remember. Now We have to remember. I don't know how to help you remember. Yes, you do. She pointed at the journal in my hand. Alexander wrote it all down. Every death, every spirit, every loop we've been stuck in. He documented us because he couldn't save us. I opened the journal, finding the pages Alexander had marked with careful dates and locations. Caroline Hendricks, nurse, died in 7th floor supply closet fire, April 9th, 1997. Thomas Webb, patient, died in 2nd floor room 214 after trauma surgery complications, June 3rd, 2004. 37 children, ages 3 to 14, died in Willowbrook Orphanage dormitory fire, January 22, 1962. The spirits crowded closer, drawn to the documentation of their own deaths. "Read it," the girl whispered. "Read it so we can remember." So I did. I read every entry Alexander had recorded over 31 years, read the names of children who died calling for help that never came, read about patients who coded in surgery and never understood they hadn't survived, read about Caroline Hendricks, who'd run into a supply closet to grab oxygen tanks during an unofficial fire and got trapped when the sprinkler system failed and the door warped from heat. With each name, each date, each careful description, the spirits became more solid, more present. The teenage boy, Marcus Chen, died in pediatric ward August 1968, pressed both hands to his face and made a sound that might have been a sob. The elderly woman, Dorothy Patterson, died in 4th floor room 409, December 2001, sank to the floor with her head bowed. The girl stood perfectly still, tears running down her translucent cheeks. "My name was Sarah," she said when I finished reading. "Sarah Mitchell. I was 6 years old. I died because the attic stairs collapsed and the smoke was too thick, and Miss Brennan couldn't reach us in time. Yes. I've been dead for 62 years. Yes." She looked at her hands, watching them fade and solidify in rhythm with the emergency lights. "I don't have to push on the wall anymore. No, I can stop now. You can stop now." Sarah Mitchell, age 6, orphanage fire victim, lifted her head and smiled at me. It was the saddest expression I'd ever seen. Then she faded, not dramatically, not with light or sound or any of the theatrical elements I'd have expected. She just, stopped being there. One moment present, the next gone, like she'd finally stepped through a door that had been invisible until she remembered it existed. The other spirits began fading too. Marcus Chen first, then Dorothy Patterson, then Caroline Hendricks, who'd been standing near the supply closet she'd died in. One by one, the corridor emptied as they remembered their deaths and found whatever came after. The emergency lights stopped flashing. The elevator doors closed and the cab descended to the 1st floor, where it belonged. The call buttons went silent. I stood alone in the 7th floor corridor, holding Alexander's journal and my flashlight, and understood with absolute certainty that I'd just destroyed the only thing keeping this hospital safe. The protocols hadn't trapped the spirits. They'd contained them, yes, but more importantly, they'd kept them from remembering. Kept them in their loops, repeating their final moments without understanding what those moments meant. The barriers had prevented the living from triggering the recognition that would set the dead free. Now the barriers were gone, and I had no idea what else might come through the spaces where they used to be. The spirits didn't vanish. I stood in that 7th floor corridor for maybe 3 minutes after Sarah Mitchell faded, holding Alexander's journal and waiting for the building to settle. The emergency lights had stopped flashing. The elevator had gone quiet. Everything felt normal again, or what passed for normal in a hospital at midnight. Then I heard the crash from the 4th floor. I took the stairs down 2 at a time, flashlight beam bouncing off concrete walls. The 4th floor west corridor was empty when I arrived, but room 412's door stood open and the bedside monitor lay on the linoleum tiles, screen cracked, power cord yanked clean from the wall socket. Mrs. Patterson, no relation to Dorothy from the 7th floor, sat upright in her bed, eyes wide, pointing at the corner near the window. "Someone was there," she said. "A boy, just standing there looking at me." I picked up the monitor. The plastic casing had split along one side. No way it had just fallen. Someone would have had to grab it and throw it. What did he look like? Teenager, maybe, wearing pajamas, old-fashioned ones. She pressed her hand to her chest, breathing hard. He reached toward the monitor and it just flew off the table. The teenage boy from the 7th floor. The one in 1960s pajamas who'd been staring at his hands, trying to understand why they looked wrong. I reported the incident to Catherine as equipment malfunction. She looked at me for a long moment, then wrote it up without asking questions. 3 more incidents happened before dawn. The 3rd floor medication refrigerator opened on its own and stayed open until the temperature alarm went off, spoiling $200 worth of insulin. A wheelchair rolled down the 2nd floor corridor with nobody in it, picking up speed until it crashed into the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. And every faucet in the 1st floor bathroom turned on simultaneously at 4:17 a.m., flooding the tile floor before Marcus the janitor could shut off the water main. I wrote each incident in my own notebook. Not Alexander's journal. That stayed in my back pocket. But a fresh composition book I'd bought from the hospital gift shop on my dinner break. Different handwriting, different approach. The spirits hadn't found peace, they'd found freedom. By the end of the week, I'd documented 43 separate incidents. Equipment failures, mostly. Phones ringing with no one on the line. IV poles falling over in rooms where patients swore they'd seen shadowy figures. Light bulbs exploding in sequence down empty corridors at 2 a.m. Cold spots that appeared without warning, dropping the temperature 15 degrees in a 5-foot radius, then vanishing just as fast. Bentley started carrying a thermometer on his rounds. "Room 518, he told me on Thursday night, showing me the digital readout. 62 degrees by the closet, 74 everywhere else. No vents, no windows open, no explanation." I checked my notebook. Room 518. Alexander had documented a death there in 2007. Cardiac arrest patient named Gerald Morrison, who'd coded 3 times before finally staying dead. Bentley didn't need to know that. The patients knew something was wrong, though. Mrs. Chen stopped sleeping with her lights off. Mr. Rodriguez requested a room transfer after seeing a woman in an old hospital gown standing at the foot of his bed. The night shift staff started traveling in pairs. Nobody wanted to walk the corridors alone anymore. Catherine pulled me aside on Friday night, near the 2nd floor nurses' station. "This didn't happen before," she said quietly. "Alexander's rules kept things separate. Alexander's rules kept everyone afraid. Alexander's rules kept everyone safe." She crossed her arms. "You broke the barriers. You gave them attention. Now they're everywhere." I couldn't argue with that. I'd read Sarah Mitchell's name from Alexander's journal, helped her remember she was dead, watched her fade into whatever came after. I thought the others would follow. Thought remembering would be enough to let them move on. I'd been wrong. The realization settled over me sometime during my 3rd week, standing in the basement security office at 2 a.m., looking at the wall of surveillance monitors. Camera 4 showed the 3rd floor corridor. Camera 7 covered the 1st floor lobby. Camera 12 displayed the 6th floor nurses' station. On camera 4, a shadow moved across the wall with no corresponding body to cast it. On camera 7, the lobby elevator doors opened and closed 3 times in sequence, nobody entering or exiting. On camera 12, every light in the corridor flickered in rhythm for exactly 10 seconds, then went still. This was my job now. Not avoiding the spirits, not pretending they didn't exist, not following rules designed to maintain barriers between the living and the dead, understanding them, helping them, finding out what they needed. I'd rejected Alexander's approach the moment I climbed those stairs to the 7th floor. He'd spent 31 years documenting deaths, marking locations, writing protocols to keep the living separate from the trapped. He'd known their names and stories, but never tried to help them move forward. Just maintained the status quo, kept everyone afraid and separate and ignorant. That wasn't going to work anymore. I'd broken those barriers intentionally, knowing exactly what Alexander's rules represented. I'd chosen communication over avoidance, understanding over fear. Now I had to figure out what came next. I started with the basics. When equipment broke down without mechanical cause, I checked my notebook for deaths in that location. When patients reported shadowy figures, I cross-referenced Alexander's journal for matching descriptions. When cold spots appeared, I stood in them and spoke aloud, asking what they needed, why they were still here. Sometimes I got responses, a door opening, lights flickering in pattern. Once, in room 307 of the pediatric ward, I felt small cold fingers brush against my palm when I asked if anyone was there. Mostly, though, I got silence. These spirits weren't like Sarah Mitchell, coherent enough to speak and explain. They were fragments, loops, impressions of trauma burned into the building's memory, repeating without awareness or understanding. I developed methods through trial and error. When the third-floor medication refrigerator kept opening on its own, I researched the room's history and found a nurse named Patricia Yates who died of anaphylaxis in 1994 after a medication error. Wrong drug pulled from that exact refrigerator. I stood there at midnight and read her story aloud from Alexander's journal, acknowledged her death, apologized on behalf of the hospital that had never formally recognized the mistake. The refrigerator stayed closed after that. When the second-floor wheelchair kept rolling into the wall, I tracked down the patient who died in it. Stroke victim named Thomas Webb, deceased 2011, found slumped in his wheelchair near that exact section of corridor. I spoke his name, described his death, told him he didn't need to keep trying to reach the nurse's station for help that would never come. The wheelchair stayed parked after that. Slow progress, individual cases. Each spirit needed different approaches, different acknowledgments. Some needed their deaths witnessed. Some needed apologies. Some just needed someone to say their name and confirm they'd existed, mattered, been real. I was learning, adapting, becoming something Alexander had never been. Not a watchman avoiding the darkness, but a guardian helping the lost find their way out of it. I ran into Lexi on Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., just as the day shift was arriving. She was leaving through the main lobby, light blue scrubs rumpled from her overnight shift, silver cross necklace catching the early sunlight through the entrance windows. "Hey," she said, offering a tired smile. "Quiet night." I thought about the cold spot in room 604, the shadow that had moved across camera 4's feed, the sound of children laughing from the pediatric ward at 3 a.m. that had faded when I'd approached. Quiet enough. You? Exhausting. She shifted her bag to her other shoulder. I've been pulling doubles all week. I think it's catching up with me. You should get some rest. I will. She hesitated, then added, I've been meaning to thank you for checking on that crying child situation last week on the 7th floor. I kept my expression neutral. Find out what it was? Oh, Catherine was right. Pipes or ventilation or something. Lexi laughed, a little embarrassed. I feel silly for making such a big deal about it. I was probably just overtired, you know. Working too many hours, not sleeping enough. Your brain starts playing tricks. She had no idea, no concept of how close she'd come to something genuinely dangerous. Sarah Mitchell crying in that storage room, pushing against the wall for 62 years, trapped in a loop of terror and confusion. The 7th floor corridor filled with spirits who'd been contained by Alexander's rules until I'd broken the barriers and helped them remember. Lexi had heard Sarah's voice through the stairwell door and reported it to Catherine, who dismissed it as building sounds. Then she'd convinced me to investigate, setting everything in motion. She'd been the catalyst for the entire 7th floor incident, and she thought it was pipes. Yeah, I said. Brain does that when you're tired. Exactly. She smiled again, relieved. Anyway, I should get going. See you tonight? See you tonight. I watched her walk to her car, cross necklace glinting as she moved. She had no idea she'd almost encountered something that would have shattered her understanding of reality. No concept that the hospital she worked in was populated by the dead as well as the living. She'd attributed the whole experience to stress and overwork, filed it away as a moment of exhaustion-induced confusion, and moved on with her life completely unaware of the supernatural harm she'd narrowly avoided. Maybe that was better. Safer. Let her keep believing in pipes and ventilation and rational explanations. I had enough to handle without worrying about Lexi's awareness of the spirits walking these corridors. I kept working nights at Riverside General, clocked in every Sunday through Thursday at 10 p.m., same as always. But the job Alexander trained me for, checking doors, testing batteries, logging entries, that wasn't what I did anymore. The hospital kept operating. 4 floors of patients, emergency department bringing in car accidents and heart attacks, and broken bones at all hours. Day shift nurses arrived at 7 a.m., switched out with evening shift at 3 p.m., handed everything to Catherine's night crew at 11. Doctors made rounds. Janitors mopped floors. Kitchen staff delivered meal trays. Administration shuffled paperwork in second-floor offices. Patricia Volkov sent email reminders about updated fire safety protocols and mandatory training sessions. Normal hospital operations, except I knew what moved through these corridors after midnight when the building emptied and visiting hours ended. I started keeping different records. Alexander's journal stayed in my back pocket. I'd earned that much, carrying his 31 years of documentation everywhere I went. But my own composition book, the one I bought from the gift shop that first week, that became my working log. I documented every incident, every encounter, every spirit who remained bound to this place. Wrote down names when I learned them. Recorded locations, times, patterns of behavior. Room 518 stayed cold by the closet. 62 degrees every night at 2 a.m., climbing back to normal by dawn. I researched the room's history through hospital archives Patricia gave me access to after I explained I was updating security documentation. Found records of Margaret Chen, age 73, who died of pneumonia in that room in 1998. Winter death. She'd been cold at the end, nurses noting she kept asking for more blankets even when her fever spiked to 104. I brought an extra blanket to room 518 one Tuesday night, folded it carefully and set it on the chair by the closet where the temperature dropped lowest. Spoke her name aloud, told her she didn't need to be cold anymore. The closet stayed 74 degrees after that. 3rd floor still had issues with the medication refrigerator. Door would swing open at random intervals, temperature alarm sounding until someone closed it. I'd already helped Patricia Yates move on, read her story, acknowledged her death from the medication error that killed her, but the refrigerator kept opening. Took me 3 weeks to figure out it wasn't Patricia. I spent a night sitting in the 3rd floor medication room, back against the wall, watching the refrigerator. It opened at 1:47 a.m. No wind, no vibration, just the door swinging wide and cool air spilling out. I walked over and looked inside. Insulin vials on the 2nd shelf, lined up in careful rows. "You're checking the medication," I said to the empty room. The door stayed open. I pulled out my composition book and started reading hospital records I'd photocopied. Found her on page 12. Janet Morrison, night shift nurse, died 2003 from cerebral aneurysm during her rounds. Her supervisor's incident report noted she'd been checking medication inventory when she collapsed. They found her on the floor by the refrigerator, clipboard still in her hand. "You were doing your job," I told her. Told the space where she'd died, where she kept returning to finish the task she'd started. Checking inventory, making sure everything was properly stored and accounted for. I read her full name, her date of death, the supervisor's notes about her dedication, and attention to detail. "The medication is secure," I said. "Your inventory was accurate. You can rest now." The refrigerator door closed with a soft click. It stayed closed. That became my routine. Not security rounds, though I still checked doors and logged entries because Patricia expected those reports. But my real work happened in the spaces between those standard procedures. I investigated patterns, researched histories, spoke to presences that Alexander had only documented and avoided. Catherine stopped arguing with me after the first month. She'd been furious those initial weeks, pulling me aside at the nurse's station and telling me I'd made everything worse, that Alexander's protocols existed for good reason, that I had no idea what I was dealing with. But the incidents decreased. Equipment stopped malfunctioning as frequently. Cold spots faded. Phones stopped ringing with no caller on the line. "You're actually fixing it," she said one night in early December. We stood at the second-floor station, her reviewing charts while I updated my log. "I thought you'd just stirred everything up and left us to deal with the chaos." "I stirred it up," I admitted. "But Alexander's way. Keeping everyone separate, maintaining barriers that just prolonged everything. These people died here. Some of them died badly. They're stuck in those moments, repeating them, trapped in fear and confusion." Catherine set down her pen. "And you help them remember." "I help them understand. Once they know what happened, once someone acknowledges their death and their story, they can move on. Find whatever comes next." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You believe there's something next." I thought of Sarah Mitchell fading from the 7th-floor corridor, her sad smile as she stopped existing in this space. The way Marcus Chen and Dorothy Patterson and Caroline Hendricks had simply stepped through invisible doors once they remembered their own deaths. "Yeah," I said. "I believe there's something next." Bentley became my unofficial research assistant. He'd always been curious, asking questions Alexander shut down, wanting to understand the protocols instead of just following them blindly. When I started investigating room histories and tracking spirit patterns, he volunteered to help. "Room 604 again," he told me one Wednesday night, appearing at the security office door with his thermometer. Mrs. Patterson reported her call button activating on its own. Temperature's normal, but I heard footsteps by the window when the room was empty. I checked my notes. Room 604 had 3 documented incidents in the past month, all between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., all near the window. "I'll look into it," I said. I found records of Thomas Webb, different Thomas from the wheelchair incident, who died in room 604 in 2007. Heart attack, survived the initial event, died 3 days later from complications. His wife's visitor log showed she'd sat by the window every afternoon, then stopped coming the day before he died. He'd died alone, watching that window. I spent a night in room 604 after Mrs. Patterson transferred to a different room. Sat in the chair by the window from midnight to dawn. Spoke Thomas Webb's name. Told him his wife had been there. That she'd stayed as long as she could. That sometimes people couldn't bear to watch the end. "You weren't abandoned," I said to the empty room. "She loved you. She just couldn't watch you die." The call button stayed silent after that. This was my job now. Guardian, Catherine called me once. Someone who stood between the living patients who needed healing and the dead who needed peace. I made sure both could exist in this building without hurting each other, without fear driving every interaction. I still carried Alexander's journal, still followed some of his protocols, fresh batteries in my flashlight, documentation of every incident, awareness of the building's rhythms and patterns, but I'd stopped hiding from what moved through these corridors, stopped pretending the rules could keep everything contained forever. Healing the living sometimes required helping the dead find peace. I understood that now, sitting in the basement security office at 3 a.m. with my composition book open and surveillance monitors showing empty hallways. The hospital operated above me, patients sleeping in their beds, nurses making rounds, doctors on call in the break room. And in the spaces between, in the cold spots and flickering lights and doors that opened on their own, spirits remained. Not all of them. I'd helped dozens move on since that night on the 7th floor. But new deaths happened. People died in hospitals. Some of them stayed, confused or frightened or simply unfinished. I'd be here to help them remember, to acknowledge their stories, to make sure they found whatever came next instead of repeating their final moments for decades while night watchmen documented their loops and wrote protocols to avoid them. The elevator chimed. I glanced at the monitor showing the lobby camera. Empty cab, doors closing, ascending to the 4th floor. I picked up my flashlight and headed for the stairs.